Alright guys, welcome back to another Conscious Conversation. This is episode number 31 and I'm joined by another very special guest all the way from London. Say hello to Ambika. How are you doing, Ambika?
Hi, I'm great, thank you. How are you?
I'm really good. Did I pronounce your name right there?
Yeah, it's with the accent a little bit, but it's all fine.
How do you say it?
So it's actually pronounced Ambika, but a lot of people pronounce it like Ambika or Ambika and all sorts, so I'm used to it.
We have to kind of make it very English so that people can pronounce your name. I've had a couple of people mention like when we say karma, we say karma and stuff like that. And it's for the Western audience, just for that they understand what we're saying. So yeah, it's fine. So Ambika is the wife of Darshan that we had on 2 podcasts ago, and that conversation, we got a lot of good response from that conversation, and so we just thought we'll get the other half on, the more eloquent version.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Well, sweet talking and very easy to listen to as well. So where do we start here? I'll have to start exactly how I start with Darshan. So how do we know each other, and how do we first come across each other? I think it wasn't at the Shibir, was it? Because I didn't attend that one.
No. Oh my god, where did we first?
I think it was last year for the ISKCON.
Rathayatra, yeah. That's where we first met. I remember. You came with your sisters. I was like, oh my god, what are they doing here? It was a bit of a was it a last minute thing or is it just...
I think it was a last minute thing. I mentioned it to my sisters that I wanted to go because the week before I was already in London we had like a meeting with Block, the company I work for, and they invited us over for the training weekend, so we had a good time, and I thought, might as well make another trip next week, and it literally was last minute. But my sisters had already met you through...
Yes, your sisters I'd met at Shibari, yeah.
Yeah, and that's how we got acquainted. And then I found out that you were obviously Darshan's missus, because my sisters didn't know that until the end of the last day.
Yeah,
right?
It was quite funny. We were talking, it was like during one evening or something, and we were just talking and like having jokes and banter and all the rest of it. I thought they knew, but they had no clue. And I'm just talking about him, like, saying all sorts of things, so yeah.
So let's talk about that then. So how did you and Darshan meet?
Oh my god, right, this is it, I'm outing it now. It's going to be like, why did you tell everyone? It's a bit cringy, but basically he saw me on Instagram and the truth is coming out now. He saw me, it was through, I didn't know him at all at that point. I didn't know anything of him. And it was through a mutual friend. I'd attended a wedding and she put pictures up and then he'd seen me. But I think at that point it was just like, oh, he's another person that needs to know me kind of thing. He's like, and then we just got talking, and literally, actually the time that he messaged me, I was in my last year of teacher training. It was in my last week and I was so busy. I literally just told everybody I don't have time to talk to anyone because it was such a hectic time. So I literally said to him, I can't really kind of talk to you right now, but I'll kind of get back to you at some point. And then I got back to him, and then, so messages led to phone calls, and then literally just meetups all the time. And that's how it really started. Just kind of happened. From there, we just found that we had a lot in common. And our meetups and dates just consisted of going for walks and going to the park and meeting up in the city. Like literally that's all we did. So we got to know each other really, really quickly.
Right, and also I think how I found out that he was obviously seeing someone is that he told me I think before he told anyone else, and then I think he invited you to go to Paris with him, right?
Prague. It was a day trip to Prague.
Yeah, and he said to me that it's funny what he said actually, and I kind of was like, yeah, I probably would have done the same thing. It's the way you get to know someone and know whether you want to actually continue seeing them is if you spend an entire day with them. When you're complete strangers and then you're thrown into a place where you both don't know where you are, and you just get to know the person, and that's when the true colours come out. So yeah, it was like it's a good way of doing it, just throwing yourself into the deep end, and knowing him for many years, he's like that.
I think his thinking was, if she can spend 24 hours with me, then it's all good. We're good to kind of go. But we were already I think we already decided just before the trip that, yeah, this is good to go kind of thing. So yeah, that's that's the like short version of it, really. That's how we met and stuff.
I don't know if he mentioned that he started talking to you on Instagram, but I remember him. I think he fast tracked that part of the story, and was like, I think a couple of mutual friends knew each other, right, or something.
Yeah, it's just a mutual friend. So I didn't. It was a friend of mine who I went to school with. It was her wedding, and it was another friend who'd put the picture up, and then that's how we kind of just got talking. And I think he just liked what. I think it was like he saw my page and he just liked some of the stuff I put out. So I used to put out quotes and all this kind of funky stuff. And then he was like, oh, okay, this is quite interesting. And then that's it. And it was just like general sort of talking.
No, it's good. It's good. So how do you combine those two sort of different sectors together? Because you obviously come from the ISKCON side and Darshan obviously comes from the Swaminarayan side. So was there a bit of a clash? Because I remember we briefly talked about it on our phone call the other day. It was two completely different worlds coming together, and yeah. So how was the whole process of accepting that?
So I think initially, he told me what his background, I told you mine. But I think initially when we were talking, it was more getting to know each other as people, not so much our background. And it was just those kind of conversations. We found we really related to each other. I think we had a lot of conversations about God and about religion and spirituality, because I think it's something that's quite important, very important for both of us. And we were just sharing our experiences and just talking. And I think it at that point it was just more getting to know the path that he follows and him getting to know the path that I follow. And at first there wasn't really any clashes as such. I think it was later on when we decided to sort of get together. That's when for me personally, it was something, and I'm sure for him as well, something that we had to really think about quite seriously, because, there are some differences, but I think for us, essentially, it's all the same. It's just about that forgotten relationship with God, and like following, how do I explain it? The essence of all religions is the same. It's about that forgotten relationship with God, and it's about remembering that. And I think, and a lot of the norms or the rules that we follow are the same, like no onion and garlic, no meat eating, no drinking, and that kind of stuff. So I think in that sense, there was never really an issue. I think I wouldn't say clashes, but the differences come more when, the way we pray, or the rules and things that we follow in terms of worship and things like that. But I think for us, because we understood that it's the root of it is the same, it was okay. It was okay for us. Like, and these are things that we felt that we could work around. I think there were points where I was like, oh, okay, how's this going to kind of work going forward? But, I think for us, we get on so well that we know we can make it work. But not everybody had the same opinion. I think there were some people not from his side, actually. Everybody was really, when I went to Shiva in 2019, I was so nervous. Like, he wouldn't let me talk to any of his friends, or he wouldn't introduce me to anybody. He was like, no, just go to Shiva and you'll meet everybody. So it was really daunting for me. Like, I remember the coach ride up, and I was like, oh my God, what if I don't like it? What's going to happen? And I think for me, that was like, I needed that experience to know if I could actually be with this person, get married to them, and live with them. So I went, and everybody was just so welcoming. They were so nice. Nobody was judgmental. And I think for me, that's when I realized, okay, this is something that I can be with this person. But from my side, there were a few people that were a bit, they were like, how can you be with somebody who doesn't follow the same thing as you? How will you make it work? What about when you have children and all that kind of stuff? But you have to, and I think I'm somebody that really takes in what people say. So it was really hard for me. Like, I had to kind of think about what was right for me and push that aside. And I'm glad that I did. And I'm glad that I listened to myself and not to other people so much. I think everybody's going to come with their own opinions and their own ideas about how things should be. But, yeah.
Yeah, so that's really interesting you say that, because I've always felt like there's more pressure on our side than I always look at the videos, ISKCON videos, and participate in their things, and people just seem very chilled. So
they are like they are. It's like with any religion, you will always have some people that have their own. They have very strong opinions, but generally, like the whole ISKCON community, and I mean, they're so welcoming. And I have like that was just a small number of people that maybe made a few comments and said a few, but generally, like everybody was just like, you know what works for you, and it's really refreshing to hear that.
Yeah, definitely. But it's very interesting how that works, where even though you come from the same root faith, that there has to be that even the conversation that maybe the other person might not be for you because of certain clashes of certain sort of rules. But like you said, it's a very, if you follow the fundamental aspects of the religion or the faith, then it shouldn't really be an issue if how you raise the kids, because you understand that the fundamental teachings are they're going to be the same. So yeah, I think you stick to that and then you see how it goes afterwards. But yeah, I think the Shibir aspect was a really good way for you to understand what's going on our side and then see if it's going to work out for you. Because what people don't understand about Indians mainly, and even when you've got obviously the followers that are not from an Indian background or from a Western background, the Indian side always has family involved very closely. So whatever decisions you make, you still have to involve your family. And I know that a lot of people don't fully understand that or fully appreciate that. But it's difficult to explain that to people, isn't it?
Yeah, I think every family is different. But from my side, I think for me it was my side of the family. They weren't so much really fussed about, okay, you have to marry within this culture, within this caste, and because my mum's Hindu and she married, my dad is a Sikh, so I think from my side it was never an issue. I think from my husband's side it was all fine. So I think we were quite fortunate, but not everybody's that lucky. Like they face a lot of, and I know personally of some people, they face a lot of they have a lot of struggle because they like somebody and they're from the same community, they're from the same like sect of Hinduism, but from a different caste, and that can be a problem. But I think that it's a very traditional way of thinking, and I think it's changed a lot. It has definitely changed a lot.
Yeah, and I think it's also based on the individuals, like you said. Like if you have two very strong people that understand the whole ins and outs of the teachings, then it doesn't really become a hindrance. But yeah, so it's amazing. So you said your background was obviously half Sikh and half Hindu, so I'm sure that had its own clashes as well, right?
Yeah, well, it kind of did for me personally, but in terms of like the way I was raised, I spent a lot of time with both of my grandparents, and both sets of my grandparents, mum's side and dad's side. And I think normally it's actually the father's religion it becomes the dominant religion when you're growing up. But for me, for some reason, it was my mum's religion. I felt it was Hinduism. I felt more connected to Hinduism, but I was still always open to Sikhism. We would go to the Gurudwara. That's where Sikhs go to pray. We would go to the Gurudwara more so as attend functions and things like that. But for me, I think for me personally, I always had more of a connection with Hinduism and ISKCON. I didn't grow up in ISKCON as such. I used to go to Janmashtami. The Janmashtami, the main festival, was like every year. Growing up as a kid, I remember that. It was actually when I was a little bit older that I started to then know more about it, or through a family member of mine who started going quite regularly, and it was my aunt, and she started taking me along with her, and that was where I was like 11, 12, and that's when things started to really like open up for me, and I saw this whole other world that I had no idea about. And when you're that age as well, you're learning more about yourself. So whilst I have a lot of respect for Sikhism and my dad's religion, for me, I've never really seen it as there's such a huge divide. I never really kind of saw that. But yeah, that's where I sort of saw myself leaning more towards. And yeah, I mean, in terms of my family and everything, they were all okay with it. Never really had any issues as such. But I know that from my mum's side, I think my mum's parents, they did initially. They weren't very accepting of my mum marrying into, forget another caste, into another religion as they saw it. And it took a lot of time for them to sort of accept and come round. But yeah, that's, for me personally, there wasn't so many clashes. I kind of already knew which direction I was sort of going in.
Yeah. Yeah, so it seems like you had the same sort of mindset that you had with, obviously, your husband now, which is understanding where you stand and then just adapting to the other person's, the tiny little differences that you have, and then accepting it. And I think there is this stigmatism where, especially as a Hindu, where, even marrying someone or dating someone who's not of the same faith, it comes with its own sort of pitfalls, because people will start to put all these things into your mind. And what usually happens, and I know a friend who's gone through this, and she had to break up with her boyfriend a couple of times, and they got back together, but it was done out of the spitefulness of one of the sets of parents. And it's just, you never want it to get down that path, but if you feel strongly about the way you feel, and you're sure about the other person, and I think that's when you have to kind of almost sacrifice your sort of family values, and sacrifice and understand that maybe it might be a risk that you have to be willing to take. And I think it's something that Sadhguru once said, that when he was growing up and he approached his parents about him marrying this girl that he met in school, they started asking him about of her family, of her father's history, what kind of caste they come from. And he goes, well, you're not marrying her, I'm marrying her. So regardless of whether she's from a lower class or not, you don't have to marry her, I'm marrying her. And I was like, that's such a refreshing way of looking at it, because you still stand by what you believe as an individual. And obviously the modern age it has its differences compared to the last generation, and you also have to kind of appreciate what the last generation had to go through to have those sets of values and stuff. But yeah, and it's just, there's a lot of negativity surrounding the caste system anyway, and it's because there isn't a full grasp of what it actually means or what it represents. And I think when the British Raj ran through India, I think that is the common understanding of what the caste system is. So yeah.
I mean, I get that. I mean, I actually had a lot of clashes with my mum and dad, to be honest, when I chose to be with the person I was with, like quite heavy clashes. And I think more it was because I think I was always quite religious and spiritual person. My parents weren't so much, and I think they had a very different idea of the kind of person they wanted me to be with. Whereas for me, I was like, no, this person has to, the most important thing is that they have to be spiritual, they have to follow a spiritual path. I think the rest of the stuff, it works out. But for me, I really saw that in my husband, like he's very sadhu-like, actually. And yeah, so I think trying to explain that to my parents was quite difficult, because they maybe were more material minded, like, okay, no, you need to be with someone who's got this kind of a job, and who can provide for you in this way and that way and speaks this way. And I think there was more of that. It was more of the superficial aspects rather than, okay, does he make you happy? What kind of person is he? He's a good person. So I had a lot of clashes with my parents in that sense. They really, really struggled. It's only now they're slowly coming round to it. And they did, and I think my mum and dad did sort of play on the whole, but you're ISKCON and he's Sarina, and how's it going to work? And that was really tough, really, really tough, because like you can deal with other people saying things, but when it's your own parents and you want their blessings, it's really, really difficult. And there were times where I was like, okay, are they right? Is this something that I need to think about? And it really did play on my mind a lot. But I kind of I stuck to what felt right, and it felt right, and I'm so glad I did. But yeah, sometimes it's not even just a clash of religions or a clash of a caste. Sometimes but you can't just be with someone who's overly religious. They have to be, they have to be more materialistic, and those are some clashes. Those are the kind of clashes that I faced with getting married to my now husband. It was never really so much the religious thing. It was more, he's too religious. You're going to have to make a lot of sacrifices for him, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, so that's really interesting you say that, because even religious parents or spiritual parents still ask those really interesting questions, which is, you know, what kind of job does he have? How much money is he making? And you would think, you know, you would get it if the family isn't religious or isn't spiritual, then those kind of questions are expected. But coming from a family that is part of the faith and understands all the ideals and all the stuff that we get taught, you wouldn't think that'd be a big issue, but it is. And where do you think that stems from?
I think that stems from the kind of upbringing they had. I think there's, especially for girls, like when you have a daughter and because you're giving the daughter away, there's this sense of, okay, she's going to be under someone else's shelter. Are they going to actually be able to look after her in the way that we've provided for her? Can they do that? And that I think that comes from more of a concern point of view. I think sometimes the way it's expressed can sometimes be it might come across like, why are my parents being like that? That's really harsh. It's so unfair. Don't they understand times have changed? But I think that comes more from a fear, like what's going to happen. I think that's where that kind of stems from that. But it's also the cultural sort of upbringing. I think a lot of parents, a lot of the older generation, they had arranged marriages. I know my grandparents, both sets of my grandparents had arranged marriages, and my parents didn't. They chose to. They met each other and then they got married. So for me, I never really. Like, I was fortunate that I always told my mum and dad, I was like, okay, I'm not going to ever have an arranged marriage. You guys didn't, so I'm not going to. But there's still that very old style thinking of, you know, how are they going to... Because they've come from very difficult times. Like my dad, when he came to this country, he was born in Kenya, but when he came here, you know, it was him, my uncle, my grandparents, they were like living in a garage, you know, and it took them, it was after many years that they got to really establish themselves, and they just don't want us to face that same sort of hardship. So I think that's where it comes from. It definitely comes from a place of concern, but it's just the way that it's kind of projected or it's expressed can sometimes come across like, why are they being like that? And, you know, we haven't seen the kind of life they've seen. This generation lives a very different life to the previous generation, and it's hard to relate. It's hard to relate to that. How can we relate to them in that way? So there's huge clash that happens. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, so that's quite interesting you say that, because I think the whole arranged marriage thing, it has its own lack of understanding as well, which is the arranged marriage that used to happen back in those days is your parents would find someone and then they'd just be like, you're going to marry this person. And the kids will just be like, yeah, sure. And that was the common practice. And obviously that has its own positives and negatives. And for the society that existed for the last 5,000, 6,000 years, that system worked. It really worked well. And now I think the biggest pitfall that we find in this generation is that we have this idea of what the perfect love is. So from Hollywood movies to Bollywood, and Bollywood's a lot worse for
it's a lot worse. Community. Yeah, I know, because I've had first-hand experience in my family of what happens when you've grown up, as in not me personally, but someone in my family, when you've grown up watching Bollywood movies and then, you know, you get married and you believe that that's the way your life is going to go, and it doesn't. And it can cause so many problems. Like, it can just end quite horrifically, which I've personally seen that happen to someone I know.
Yeah, so I think even today's Bollywood, if you compare it to 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you know, there's a reason why my sisters and I, we laugh and joke about how, even though the songs were cheesy back in the 90s, you remember them because, you know, there was some sort of cultural aspect to the way the movies were made, and now it's just a very cheap knockoff of Hollywood in a way, and it's very much exaggerated. So I think the kids, especially in India, like when I watch videos on YouTube, especially spiritual videos, and you read the comments, it's usually the negativity comes from the Indians usually, and it's Indians from India, and you just think, why is it happen, and what's going on with the generation in India right now? And it's because we're seeking very superficial ideas of what love is, what we want from life, and it turns out that, you know, everything that's materialistic, yes, you'll find some sort of pleasure from it, but you'll never truly find joy or happiness, and that comes from obviously a spiritual practice. And we see that in the West as well. A lot of the Western people turn to spirituality, they turn to psychedelics, they turn to any aspect of, connecting to their spiritual nature, because like yoga and stuff. And it's because, they're seeking happiness. And I think, we obviously live in a world where companies will exploit that, individuals exploit that, and people are getting thrown into this trap. So yeah, it's definitely something that we have to be very mindful of. And I think a lot of Indians are almost immediately put off by that, so they won't even dip their toes in that spiritual aspect or that religious aspect. So yeah. So I want to go into your upbringing as a person, and what you went through in terms of struggles and the positive things that happened in your life as well. So how was your childhood, especially growing up in London?
Yeah, my childhood, it was really good. I had a really good childhood. I think I was the firstborn, so I'm the oldest, and my sister came along when I was like 7. So up until then, it was literally just me and my mum and dad. So I spent a lot of time, a lot of time with them. Going on holidays together. It was really nice. And I think then when my brother and sister came along, I think things changed in the sense that, so I didn't get my parents' attention and everything in the same way. But we had a lot of happy memories and, trips together and a lot of good times. But I think when my brother came along, I think my mum had some struggles with depression and things like that. So I don't remember so much of that time, but what I do remember is just the feeling and the mood in the house wasn't always particularly happy. I think my parents were going through a lot of things that I wasn't really aware about. And then as soon as I hit my teen years, it was just like, oh my God, it's such a strange time. Like you're learning more about the world, you're learning more about yourself. And I spent a lot of time actually with my aunt. She was like very close to me growing up. I spent a lot of time with her. And she was actually the main person in my life who introduced me to her, like, to spirituality, to ISKCON. She got really close. She wasn't always involved. She got really closely involved with it. And then she just, whenever I'd go with her to like stay at her house or spend time with her, she would take me to the temple, the Hare Krishna temple in Watford. We'd go. And actually, I think I had my first real experience when we went for like Sunday evening kirtans at the Bhaktivedanta Manor. And I don't know, I started to experience something different. And it's just like this whole world was opening up for me, and I wanted to know more. I felt very connected, but I couldn't explain why or what was sort of going on internally. And I started to kind of go a lot more. And my parents were starting to get a little bit concerned, because I was like, you're going, she's going so much, and what about her studies and education and all of this? And then we started having a lot of clashes. Just because I was like, why can't I go? Why can't I go to this program, or why can't I go for this trip or that trip? There was a lot of clashes and things happening. And then, yeah, I think teen years were just a really, really, really big struggle. And I felt very misunderstood. I felt like my parents didn't understand me. Why couldn't they just accept? They were happy for me to kind of go to parties and things like that. But why wouldn't they just let me go to the temple? Why couldn't I, what was the problem? It was causing so many issues. Things just got really, really difficult. And it just came to a point where when I was like 18, I actually ended up running away from home. And that's like such a taboo thing to do for an Indian girl. Like, it's just, it's like something you're just not supposed to do. You don't even like talk about it or think about it. And I think from that point, my life just fully changed forever. I didn't go back home, though my parents were trying to find me. I was kind of here, there, and everywhere for a little while. And, they were trying whatever they could to get me back. But I was just like, you don't listen, you don't understand, and we're just fighting and arguing all the time. There's a lot of like clashes, and it just never understood each other and never tried to. Like, looking back now, I'm a lot older, and looking back now, I'm like, oh, why didn't I just try well, that's the beauty of hindsight, isn't it? Like, when I just tried to understand where my parents were coming from, but it was just, yeah, we were just literally just clashing all the time. I ended up sort of moving in with my grandparents, my mum's parents, and my aunt. And my parents weren't particularly happy about that initially. They had some clashes with my aunt as well. But I felt like I just couldn't go back home. And I said, I'm not going to come back unless you guys start to listen, or we just kind of sit together and work it out. But, it just didn't happen. But anyway, then I moved in with my grandparents and my aunt. And yeah, I pretty much didn't really speak to my parents for about 7 years after that. Like, they really, really tried, but it was just, I just didn't want to. I just didn't want to know. And then then life just really changed for me. My grandfather was quite elderly, and I became like a carer. So I was like looking after him, and that took up a big part of my life. Like, for 7 years from that point, I was I was caring for him. And throughout that time, I got my degree. Well, I started my degree. I was working as well, but I was caring for him. So there's so much going on. And things were going good for a while. Things were okay, and then things between me and my aunt actually got very difficult, and it turned into an abusive situation. I won't go into all. I don't want to go into all the details, but it was quite bad. And this is the first time I'm really kind of talking about it so openly. But yeah, it was a lot of psychological abuse. And I did a video about this on World Mental Health Day, where I was talking about the damaging effects of what psychological abuse does. So that was all happening, but at the same time, I was still kind of being exposed to this whole different world of spirituality. I was doing different services in the temple. I travelled with my aunt and my grandfather, and we went to so many trips to India on yatra, and I got to see some really amazing places. And I felt like I felt like I was living in two different worlds, and I couldn't understand how the two could just be. Like, I didn't know how to fit myself into this world where I'm exposed to this whole world of spirituality and religion, but at the same time, I'm in a situation that's abusive, and it just wasn't making any sense to me. And things just got worse from there, and it just got so bad to the point where I then had to kind of, for my own safety, I had to leave that situation. And then I ended up coming back home, back to my parents. But I feel like I lived a very different life. Like, I didn't have the kind of typical life that a lot of 20-year-olds had, going out and, living out in uni and stuff like that. Never had any of that. I spent most of my summers and stuff in India. I was looking after my grandfather, and I was in a situation where I had been isolated from family, and I'd been isolated from friends, so that I was never really able to escape that situation. And I had no idea. I didn't know what I was going through at all. I didn't know anything about abuse or anything. Like, I knew abuse happened, but I didn't know anything about emotional or mental abuse. And it was just a very weird time. I actually started to believe that this was normal. It was normal to be treated in the way that I was being treated, to be punished, to literally not have your own life. Like, everything dictated for you. There was just like no freedom. And it was very difficult, because this was a person that was a member of a spiritual community, and there was nobody I could talk to. And I couldn't understand how this person could be something else outside, but behind closed doors, it was a whole different picture. And it wasn't, I don't want to say that this person, like, she was a bad person or anything like that. I think she'd also been raised in a different way, and I think her upbringing had an impact on her life. But yeah, it was a very dangerous time. It was a very scary time. And just, that's how my life just fully changed forever. And I remember when I left that situation and ended up coming back home to my mum and dad. And I think my mum and dad really struggled they were happy to have me back, but they really, really struggled, because they didn't recognize who I was. I didn't even know who I was. I was like shell of a person. Like there was nothing there. There was like I didn't know how to speak to my parents. I didn't know how to tell them what I'd gone through. I didn't understand it myself. Like it was just so overwhelming. And then I started to have like very intense nightmares. I was finding it very difficult just function on a daily basis. And it was somebody else that kind of approached me and said to me, I then went and spoke to somebody who'd gone through a similar situation. And they said to me, it sounds like you're going through PTSD. And I was like, what is PTSD? And that's when I started to research. And I realized that, oh my God, I'm actually, I can relate to these symptoms. I can relate to the nightmares, panic attacks, just extreme paranoia, like inability to trust anybody. And I started to read up more and educate myself on what abuse was, what emotional abuse was. And that's how I got some of the answers to these questions that I had in my mind of what has happened to me, why am I in this position now? But I feel like whilst I'd educated myself, whilst I got these answers, I think what actually carried me through that whole situation was my faith and my spiritual practice. Like if I didn't have that in my life, I don't know where I'd be right now. That was the only thing that kept me going. And I just, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know how to exist without it. It's such a intrinsic part of who I am. But yeah, it was quite a scary time in my life. And I think what people don't understand is whilst I was physically out of that situation, mentally, I was still in that same place. And it's very difficult to come out of that situation just fully okay. It's almost impossible. And whilst you may not know what's kind of, you may think you're okay and you're doing fine because you're out of that situation, but you're mentally trapped. And I also felt like that while I was in the situation as well. Like I could have left at any point. I could have left when things got so bad. But it took like a very serious situation to happen for me to kind of wake up and realize something's not right. And it was actually while she was away from me for a while. She'd gone to India with my grandfather and I'd been home with my grandfather. It was like 8 weeks or something. And I got to see this whole life of normal people. And I got talking to people and I realized that my situation's not normal. Nobody lives like this. Nobody lives in the way that I'm living right now. And I think that for me was a breakthrough. And it was a very confusing time. And I was so trapped in that situation that mentally in my head, I felt like this was going to be my life forever. Like I said, I don't know what I would have done if I didn't have my faith, if I didn't have my practice. That's what's carried me through my whole life, my whole journey, and even now. Like that for me, it's just this feeling of like you're put in a situation that you feel like you can't do anything. There's nothing you can do. So much is outside of your control. And you're at a point where you have to really just surrender to whatever you believe in at that point. For me, it was believing in God, and that's it. Yeah, that's kind of like a little bit of a snapshot of like my life. I had a very different idea when I was like 16, 17 of what my life was going to be like, and then it just completely changed literally like overnight.
Yeah, so that idea is, when you grow up, when you're a kid and you're looking at the adults and you're growing up, you see the chance of just like being able to drive a car, go wherever you want in the world and just enjoy life as something that gives you more freedom. But then as you start to transition into a teenager and then you transition into an adult, you start to see that the lifestyle has its own pitfalls. And now it's funny, all these years later, we look back at our childhood and we look back in very fond memories of actually being a very free, loving kid. And it's something that we all have to go through. And I think it's something that Jordan Peterson has mentioned many times in his lectures, that as you grow up, you have to kind of find your inner child again. You know, you have to rediscover your inner child. You have to leave him behind for a bit, or leave her behind for a bit, as you transition into an adult and you take the responsibilities of an adult. But then if you don't integrate that child back into your lifestyle, that's when most of people's problems start to build up again. Depression, mental health, it starts to become a problem. So I just want to go into you said that the person obviously abusing you, she was very she was part of the spiritual community. She was a spiritual person. So, do you feel as though she was almost using the spiritual practice to disguise her insecurities and her problems that she was going through herself?
So one thing I firmly believe is that we can never ever comment on anyone's spiritual sort of relationship with God. We can never ever say where a person's at. We just can't. We're not in that position. But I think being in that environment was a way to cushion. It was the way to cushion her, and sort of it was to kind of hide maybe what was going on behind closed doors. And I know that some of what was going on was consciously being done and unconsciously being done. But yeah, I think that's one of the things that we have to be aware of. And I didn't know until I've experienced it for myself, was that, you know, some people do use spirituality as a way to sort of mask or sort of hide, and sometimes not just even hide, but also when they know themselves that they could be quite dangerous around people. I think putting yourself in that kind of environment almost makes you feel safer, and it's also a way that person can hide the things that they're doing. I mean, I remember like just seeing it was like literally living with two completely different personalities, two different people, and it was scary. It was scary how this person could completely just like, it almost felt like, how can this person hate me so much that they're doing this to me, but they're so loving and kind towards other people. I just couldn't see it. I couldn't understand how that works. And because her personality is very charming and very, like, you know, like very, yeah, just somebody who gets on with people, it was very hard for people to, if I went and told somebody, like, how would they even understand? They'd be like, what are you talking about? You're crazy. There's no way this person could be like this. And I also didn't want to, I'm somebody who doesn't like confrontation and all that kind of stuff. So for me, I just wanted to sort of bury my head and just be like, okay, you know what, just accept that this is the way it is. There must be something wrong with me. It's not her. And for a very long time, I believed that. Like, I was in a position where I just blamed myself. I thought I was I must be the worst person in the world. I must be this really awful person. I must deserve what's happening to me. But yeah, I think looking back now, somebody who behaves like that towards someone else, they must be in pain, or they must be insecure. There must be something else going on. Otherwise, I think people who are just naturally happy, naturally positive, they don't know how to be horrible to other people. They don't know how to be unkind to other people. It's just not in their nature. So yeah.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. And how's your relationship with this person now? Are you still talking to her?
No, I think when you have experiences like that, if the person cannot own up to what they've done, it's best just to walk away. And I think it got to that point where that person just, in front of me and in front of other people, my parents mainly, just denied everything. And that was really hard, because in my head I started thinking, did I make it all up? But no, I didn't make it up, because this did happen. But yeah, I was point blank told that if you ever say anything to anybody, I'll never admit to any of it. So I just thought, I think I got to a point where I was like, I just want to be away, as far away as possible, and just have my own life, and just, you know, a place that's untouched by that. But that was difficult, because we're part of the same community, part of the same spiritual community. And initially, like, I was so paranoid about what other people knew and what other people had been told about me, because there were, like, lies were told about things that I'd done and who I was and things like that. And it made it very hard. I felt like I couldn't even go to the temple, because I was worried somebody would say something to me, or what would they be thinking. And for a long time, I couldn't. I found it very difficult to go and be in that place. But I had to do a lot of work on myself, and I had to really push past all of that. to realize that I'm actually not going there for other people. I'm going there because that's a place of worship, and anybody can go. So yeah.
So was this happening when you met Darshan, or was that the...
No. So I'd come back home, and then I'd come back to my parents, and then like the more I kind of made myself aware of what I'd gone through and spoken to somebody else who'd gone through a similar situation, I got some validation, and I started to feel a sense of like relief that I knew what had happened. And then I think when I'd come back initially, I'd had about a few months where I was just all over the place. I didn't know what was kind of going on. My health wasn't very great either, because it didn't just affect me mentally, it affected me physically as well. And then I think my mum and dad could see that, and they were worried, like, we don't know where she's going to kind of end up going down, what kind of road she's going to go down. So they were like, okay, you need to just get some focus back. Your life is your own now. You need to own it. And then that's when I was talking to them, I said, okay, well, I don't know what to do in terms of like a career or anything like that. You know, the only kind of experience I have in terms of work is working with children. And then they're like, okay, did you maybe think about teaching or something like that? And then that's when I then did my teacher training at Cambridge University. And it was that initial kind of time was like a really good time in my life. Like I started to get my confidence back. You know, I had a lot of support from my mum and dad, and things were just getting a lot better. And then so that was when I did my teacher training. This was in 2017, 18. But even throughout that time, even throughout that course, like so many things from my past started to come up. I was getting triggered so heavily by so much stuff. And then when I came out of that situation from my aunt, I ended up befriending somebody. They'd helped me come out of that situation, but I'd ended up going from another situation, another controlling person, to now another controlling person who was a friend of mine. And, you know, and I was like, there must be something wrong with me, or why am I attracting these kind of people into my life? And then I had to break ties with that person when I realised that, this is another person that just wants to have control over me. And then it was only like near the end of my teacher training course, that's when I met my husband. And like my life literally just changed. Like it's like there was a whole huge shift in my life when he came into my life. Just massive shift in terms of like, it was just so refreshing to be around somebody who wasn't connected to any of my past, and who was so easygoing and just like a normal person. And yeah, that's when I got like, I like to say that he kind of like saved me in so many ways that he doesn't even know how, and I don't even know how. It's just actually that period of my life was a time when I was actually kind of really praying very intensely. Like I turned towards prayer because I was on this course that was extremely demanding, very, very, like, very stressful. At the same time, I was having a lot of difficulties with a friend. You know, they were getting very controlling. I didn't know what to do in that situation. And I just entered this mood of intense, like, prayer, and just something needs to change in my life. And yeah, as soon as my husband came into my life, like, just my whole world just changed. And I felt like this was a new opportunity for me. I felt like God was kind of giving me a chance to just start my life over.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. So there's a couple of things I want to go into. I want to go into the teaching aspect in a second, but it's interesting you say that about Darshan, because that kind of person is a rarity. I know that, you know, we think obviously that's the normality and that's the kind of person you want, but honestly, like, that kind of person is a rarity. When I was in London for a short period of time, I did my work placement in London, and I spent a large portion of time in obviously in Kenton, in Harrow, in the northern part of London, and getting to know all the people in London. And I noticed one common thing when I walked away from it, and I really didn't want to move to London. I noticed that there was this very how to describe it, like, people were living two lives. You know, their second life was more of them. Their first life was a show to show people that, you know, they're this kind of religious person. They participate in temple activities. They're strong with their spiritual, teachings and stuff. But I can definitely see through that, and I've always been good at that. And obviously, it was none of my business to get down that path until I was more heavily involved in it with a person. And I could see that, and I was like, this can't be the normal thing. Like, how can you live a lifestyle where, you're jealous over your sister, or you're really envious over this person that you literally want. You feel as though she's been controlling your entire life, or your parents are quite controlling. And I'm just like, this seems like it's a normal thing for people down south. And it's something I've also talked to my sisters about, and this is the first time I mention it in public, but we always talk about this. Like, the northern folk, the northern Indians up here, we have a lot of influence from obviously the western folk up here, and a large portion of that is being very open and being very clear. So when we as a northern folk say something, it generally means that, that's how we feel about it. Whereas I felt when I was down south, the way people expressed themselves was not the way they felt inside. It was almost like you have to beat around the bush to finally get through to them. And I remember being in a very turbulent confrontation with a person, and I literally had to poke holes just to find out the deeper reason behind why this person was saying certain things. And I was like, this is a horrible way of existing. Like, why do you not want to get out of that loop? Or why do you not want to move up north? And I've noticed something that a lot of the girls that, and again, this is a generalization, and I hope that it isn't something that is attributed to all the people down south, but when I noticed that all the people that moved from south to north, moved from Manchester to Oldham to Cardiff in Wales, once they left that environment, they felt a sense of peace and almost like, they can start their life again. And like you said, the fact that you met Darshan meant that you can start your life again with a new bunch of people, and you can leave your past in the past. And I felt, that initial jump for a lot of people down south is quite difficult for a lot of girls. And I do get it. It stems from family. Like, you don't want to leave your family and start a new life with a bunch of new people. But I think it's something that more people should actually do, even if it means that you don't marry into someone who's from up north, but at least try and live away from home. Because when you're in that bubble in London, rumours spread. Like, Indians are notorious for rumours and gossip. And that spreads heavily. It spreads really badly. And, I had my fair share of rumours. And I remember talking to, obviously, your husband. Him and I were good friends through the last 10 years. And I remember saying to him, I was like, mate, all this kind of... Well, he was saying to me, actually. He said, there's this kind of rumour spread about you. And I'm just like, mate, you know me too well. Like, I don't give a shit. And I was so dumb back then that I would also stir the pot. I'm like, if there's rumours going to be spread about me, why not stir the pot more? And I didn't really see the negative thing about that, because I had such a light attitude towards it, and I still have it to this to today's day and age. But now it's like, nothing really affects me. Whereas back then, even though I said that nothing affected me, I still wanted people to accept me. So yeah,
I think everybody wants that. Doesn't matter how much of a front you put on. What people, more than even being loved, what people want is to be understood and accepted for who they are. Because that's sometimes in others accepting you makes it easier for you to accept yourself. And I think it's harder to accept yourself and not expect that from others. And yeah, it's a very hard way to live, actually, because I know that there are some people that, they might not be super religious or super spiritual or anything like that, but they love coming to the temple and they love doing their bit, and then they love to have their other life. And I used to be quite judgmental of that. I used to be like, well, how does that work? You can't be like that. I'm not like that. Why are they like that? Kind of thing. But now I'm like, you know what? It's okay, because everybody's on their own journey. They're on their own path, and they have their own way of getting to it. And some people may come to it quite quickly. Other people it'll take a lot longer. But yeah, oh my gosh, I wish I could be more like you and just not care. I'm somebody who cares way too much, and that's what gets me into a lot of the trouble, actually, just caring way too much what people think. And there's such a freedom, and there's that fine line of feeling like you're not bothered by what the people say, but at the same time being accepting of what other people say. Like, oh, I get that's your opinion, but that's not my opinion, and I don't need to take that on because I feel differently about something. So, and I got like that towards my parents when it came to my husband. I was like, okay, you feel that way about him, but that's not how I feel. So don't project your fears and all that onto me. Don't make them mine. I put that boundary in place, and I think that's what kind of saved me in the end.
Yeah, and I did say to Darshan, like, when you get married, or if you get married, because we originally thought, a lot of people thought he's going to go off be a monk permanently, but I said, if you're going to get married, you're going to have to find someone who's on the level, because it's difficult, because it's something that I struggle with. It's difficult to find people that are maybe even thinking in the same way, because I obviously, being up here, not eating onion, not eating garlic, not eating out, I rarely eat out, and my friends will tell you I'm really picky even when I do, and it takes a lot of energy to get them for them to say, look, let's go to somewhere that you would eat out at, like a pure Indian restaurant, and for me it's just, originally that starts off being a minor issue. Oh, it's fine, if the person's like that, I can deal with that. But then the more you get into the relationship, and the more you start to understand that actually this is actually going to become a hindrance. And for me, I think the laid back attitude came from that. I'm just like, well, I expect that from people, to be like, okay, this guy seems like he's a cool guy, he's chilled, very simple, but then all at the same time very fussy about certain things, and we can deal with that. But then you get used to it after a while, and then you start to understand, actually, this it's becoming more of a hindrance than anything else. And for me, I jumped around, like during my early age, I jumped around. I had friends from all different parts of background. So I was friends with the geeky kids at school, I was friends with the athletic kids, because I used to love playing sport, and I was friends with everyone. And it got to a point where at the start, when you're a child and you're a teenager, you're trying to be accepted by all communities, so you're trying to please everyone and trying to be friends with everyone. But by the end of it, you start to accept that actually you're a person that doesn't belong with anyone. And it's actually, once you accept that role and you accept you're an outsider in all situations, then it doesn't become a burden. And then you start to appreciate how you can be part of a group, but you're not still of that group. It doesn't make who you are. And I think people also appreciate that as well, because in a world where everyone wants to be like someone else, to be someone that stands out and doesn't follow that trend, it's almost looked up at. People want to aspire to be that person, because they can never become that person themselves.
I think for me, I always felt like that, though. I always felt like I want to be like that person that can just not change fundamentally who they are, but still be able to relate to everyone in some way, all from all walks of life. I used to find people like that. I thought they were amazing. I thought that's such an amazing thing to be able to be like that, or to have that.
Yeah. But I think you have to go through that struggle. You have to go through all that, the crap, all the baggage, to become that person. I think some people, a very rare amount of people, are born like that. But I think majority they go through that upbringing, they go through the struggles. Like, I was a middle child, so it was very normal for me to kind of go through that. And the other thing is to let go of your parents' expectations. Like, as Indians, we have a lot of pressure upon us, from our friends, from our parents, to become someone that is known in society or is successful. And I learned from a young age that wherever I did was never going to be enough for my father. So I'm just like, that burden's off my shoulders now.
Yeah, I totally understand that. That's just an Indian thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and once that's off your shoulders, then life becomes just an opportunity just to play around and just to see where it takes you. So
one thing you said about, like, obviously my husband, I think for my parents, when I told them that he doesn't eat out, he doesn't eat onion and garlic, and he has all these strict rules, and they were like, what? Like, they're like, you can't be with someone like that, that's not normal. Like, he's never going to take you out to eat and stuff like that. But for me, it was never an issue. I actually admired that about him. I was like, I want to be like that. I want to be like that, like, have that kind of, that sense of, like, these are my principles, and be very, I mean, it's so, like, you wouldn't think that at all. He's so chilled out. He's so, like, carefree. But I think when it comes to his spiritual life, he knows who he is, and this is what he follows, and there's just no compromise. And, like, for me, like, I know other people will have these impressions, but I live with him, and I see that he is, like, the way that he is with everybody else, like, it's literally who he is. He doesn't change for anybody. And that's really amazing. Like, he's the same person that I met the first time that I met him. Like, nothing's changed. And I think for me, that's a really amazing quality to have. Yeah.
And the thing is, that kind of stuff where, you're strict about certain things you do, what people don't understand is, as people doing that, like Darshan and I really got along for that reason, because we're people that stuck to our morals. It isn't an effort for us. what people don't understand is for the person that has that looks as though it's quite strict to the normal person, you look at that, you think the person doesn't eat onion garlic, doesn't eat out, doesn't do this and that. You almost think that must be a burden on the person because the person has to always fight that urge. But if you've never done it, or if you've done it for such a long time, it's not even an issue. It doesn't even, it's second nature. So, and I always joke around about it with my students and stuff. Like, if anyone has eaten onion or garlic, I can smell it straight away. And I'm like, I'm not coming anywhere near you. And we laugh and joke about it, but it's got to a point in, I think, people's lives where they start to appreciate that actually, it's not that much of an issue for that person. So why should it be an issue for me?
Yeah, because when it comes from you, and it's not come from a sense of like, okay, this is what I want to follow, and I want to do it for myself, or because this is what I believe. And when that comes internally, then there is no struggle. There's no sense of you don't have that battle of, where temptation comes in, because it comes from a place of full acceptance of this is who I am. And I think also because he spent a lot of time in India around Swamis, and I think that's been a huge inspiration for him. I think for him seeing that, he's imbibed a lot of that, because you do become a lot of what who you associate with.
Yeah. I think also at the same time, both him and I, he dabbled with his time with, obviously doing the typical stuff, like the alcohol, the drugs, etc., whatever he got into. And I had my fair share of doing similar stuff, but I never really got into alcohol or drugs. But I had a lot of relationships, and I think something that is not fully understood is some people just need to obviously go through the experience and then come out of it and then realize actually it's not something I want anymore. And I think that is stopped immediately. We don't allow that to happen in spiritual practices. We don't allow that to happen in any religious practices, because we immediately say, well, this is wrong and this is right. And it shouldn't be like that. How it should be is, I think I explained it to Darshan, or I think I might have explained it to Craig, but there's 3 or 4 ways of how to approach something. So a person might learn directly from someone else's experience that actually I shouldn't be doing this, so they think I'm not going to do it, or they might have to first-hand experience it for themselves. You either have to go through the stuff yourself, or you'll see someone else doing it. Like, you touch fire, you see someone else's reaction, and you think I don't want to touch it. And then there are certain people, like there's probably me or Darshan, who will have to actually touch the fire and then find out actually it burns, so I don't want to touch it. And it's accepting that side of it. So when you said, when you have people that are not religious, not spiritual, but do come to temple and do their bit, and it makes you feel, wait a second, this person isn't doing it properly. When you have that initial, reaction, it's like, well, they are, because they're going through that secondary path, which is to experience it and then just find out.
And they're coming out of that whole cycle of, I've done this. It's like, so in ISKCON, our Acharya, like our founder, Srila Prabhupada, used to say, it's chewing the chewed. That's what people are doing. What you're doing, you're chewing that which you've already chewed, and it becomes tasteless. You find that there's nothing in it, and then you start seeking more, and you think there must be more to life than this. Like you get bored of it because it doesn't fulfill you. It gives you temporary happiness, and it all feels good in the moment. It's like when people drink, right? They get off their face and they drink loads, and the next day they wake up and they're hungover, and it's like that temporary phase is then over. And yeah, I think a lot more people are kind of coming to that conclusion now. Not like in the Western world as well. That there's more to life.
Well, it's that saying, we originally, when we're young and stuff, we're seeking happiness and joy, and everyone starts off doing all these things because they think that will bring happiness and joy. And then you end up realizing that it brought you just pleasure, but then you sacrifice, you settle for pleasure instead of actually seeking that happiness and joy. So yeah, I think there's a point in your life where when it starts to become more conscious and you start to realize, actually, am I doing this consciously or am I doing it unconsciously? You start to see that this path, it usually doesn't result in anything except, more misery, because all you do is you're happy temporarily, you're in that sense of pleasure, and then reality hits you the next morning and you realize I'm back in square one again. So it's moving away from that and realizing it as well. So yeah. And the second thing is we're talking about your teaching, and we said we wanted to get into a conversation about this. And like we both have listened to Ken Robinson, how school kills creativity, and it's so sad that he passed away in August. I didn't realize this until I watched a recent video of his. But it's something I really feel strongly about. And do you want to kind of talk about your experience as a teacher and what you've learned from your kids?
So I kind of teaching. I wouldn't say teaching exactly, but working with kids, something that found me rather than me finding it, while I was living with my aunt. She used to run something called Krishna Club, which was just like it's like a little spiritual club for children, where they're kind of learning more about ISKCON, they're learning about Krishna, who Krishna is, who God is, having that relationship with him and stuff. So I got asked to help out. And then I started helping out. Then I became like one of the leaders. And I really loved being around the kids. It was just really amazing. I mean, a lot of the children that came in didn't know anything about spirituality, anything like that. And then by the end of like 1 year, they just developed this really beautiful sort of relationship with God. And you know what children are like. They're just so unassuming and they just are who they are. They're real and they're in the moment and they say it how it is. And then from there I became a teaching assistant. And then I had no, at the time, because there was so much going on, like I had no sense of, well, where am I going in terms of a career and stuff. So I did my degree in English literature. And then, it was only when I came out of that situation, moved back with my parents, that I then decided to pursue teaching. And like going from a teaching assistant to a teacher is like a huge step up. It's so different. So I think it's something you have to really think about before you kind of make that decision to go on to then becoming a teacher. But so my year of teacher training was a really intense year. First of all, I was doing it at Cambridge, so there was a lot of different expectations, a lot of pressure as well, in that sense. And I think when I started to do my placements, I started to find that whilst you're there and you're working with the children, there's all this whole other admin side, assessment side, and all of that also starts to take over. And I started to kind of see these cracks in this kind of, like, I had a very different perception of what it's going to be like being a teacher. You're working with the children, it's a really amazing, uplifting time, and it is. But then you've got this whole other side of, then you have Ofsted coming in, and this sense of like we have to be Ofsted ready, and the whole teaching and learning aspect of why children come to school just kind of gets forgotten. And I started to experience that, like on one of my placements, I was in a year 2 class, and year 2s were like, they do SATs, they do these standardized tests basically. And I just remember, like, I was there and I was teaching, and one of these kids, like, I'm there, I'm doing this mental arithmetic sort of test with the children, and one of these kids at the back of the class started crying. I was like, why is he crying? What's happened? And I went up to him, I said, what's happened? And he said, I can't do this. It's too fast. I don't know what to do. He was just really, really struggling, and he just broke down. And I was like, that's not normal. That's not okay. It's not okay for a child to feel this way, and so much pressure. Like I got so emotional myself. Like in my break that day, I went into the bathroom and I cried because I was like, that's just so hard to watch. And I just started to see a lot of that happening, and I found it really difficult. I found it really, really difficult to understand, like, why are we putting this much pressure on these children? They're 7-year-olds, it's not right. Like, when you see education systems in other places like the Netherlands and Finland, and children don't go to school till they're 6-7 years old, when they're actually ready, they're allowed to have a childhood. So, like, one of the things that Ken Robinson speaks about in his TED Talk is that creativity is educated out of children, and I fully agree with that. And that talk was in 2006. I don't think much has actually changed. I mean, I was working as a nursery teacher a year or so back, and I loved that. Because I was, they're at that age where they're learning about themselves, and they're discovering things, and they're making new discoveries every day. And I went in when I started working at that nursery in October, not September. So they needed somebody. They had like a lot of teachers coming in and out. They needed somebody who was just going to stay. And these kids were like all over the place. They were just like, some of them hated coming to nursery. They'd be crying. I had one girl was scratching her face because she didn't want to come in. It was just such a chaotic time. But after like 2 months, they loved coming in. You could see them. They were really blossoming. Like, there's no other word to describe it. And It was such a, it was, for me, it was like a really, I was like, this is so amazing. Like, and I didn't have to, there was so much, they were teaching me more than I was teaching them. I didn't need to even teach them things. By the end of the year, they could all write their name. And I was like, I didn't even show them so much. I just kind of gave them the tools, or I guided them. That's why I always say, like, teachers shouldn't be called teachers. They should be called facilitators, because that's what we should be doing. We should be facilitating their learning. Children are naturally intelligent. They have so much with, it's all there within them. We just have to be there as a guiding force to bring that out of them. But I think that's kind of why I've had this I've gone back and forth of like, I don't want to be in that environment. I don't want to be in like a school environment where you've got this pressure of assessing the children, and kind of, it's just such a drain on teachers. You know, the dropout rate is quite high. After like 2-3 years, teachers just drop out because they can't handle the pressure. And I think our whole education system needs to change. And I kind of, like, I was kind of hoping that this whole lockdown and COVID situation would be the start of that. But again, you know, like, because a lot of these like I mentioned, Ofsted, a lot of these people that are coming in, they're politicians, or they work in politics. They have never taught a day in their life, and then they're telling teachers that these 6-year-olds need to have more time at the desk. No, they don't. They need to be out. You know, they need to be out in nature. They need to be allowed to be children. It's just, and I know, like, my time in nursery, I could see some of these children had so many. I could see the talent. I could see so much potential. You know, there was one little boy who, at that age, around 4 or 5, they don't really have much of a concept of symmetry, but he was making all these amazing models, so much attention to detail, and there was, like, so symmetrical, and it was just amazing. And I was like, this is, like, you could see that this child has so much potential. And I was like, I felt amazed to see that, but I felt sad at the same time, because I thought, as this child progresses in school, that's going to be taken away. Like, it might not be valued or acknowledged, you know. So, and that's where I feel like a lot of teenagers probably have these, like, issues in their head of, you know, what am I going to be, what am I going to do, because they probably were displaying all these talents and natural abilities that they had, but they were lost somewhere in this world, this education system. It just becomes lost. And yeah, that's for me, like, and that, I think that's when I feel now like I want to veer away from sort of working as a teacher and work more with parents, because parents are actually the first teacher for the child. You know, I think parents, you know, parents do what they can. They do what they can in the way that they know, but unless people are out there sort of giving them alternative ways of parenting, they're not gonna, what kind of children are they gonna raise? How are they gonna raise their children to be, you know, happy individuals, to be accepting of who they are? I think, yeah, and what you said a point quite earlier back about that inner child. I think as adults we need to bring that back, and, you know, like, just the joy of simple things in life. I think we kind of just, like, we lose that as adults, and that really needs to that needs to come back. And I think that's the beauty of working around, being with children and being in their presence. It's very hard to be an adult around a child. Like, you come down to you don't see a child come up to an adult level. You come down to the child's level, because their innocence is there. They are who they are. They know who they are. They're so aware of who they are. And then, I don't know, then somewhere that all just kind of gets lost. Yeah, I think that's one of the beauties of working with children. But yeah, I think now it's come to a time where parents need a whole education in how to kind of parent, and get children ready for this new world that we're living in, because the world is not the same as it was when they were younger. And yeah, so that's my feelings about teaching and all sorts. It's very mixed.
Well, you summarised it perfectly. Like, this is exactly how I feel about the whole thing, but you get a first-hand experience of what's going on behind closed doors because you're part of that system, and you were part of the system. And so there's a couple of things I want to go into. So the first thing you mentioned was that you have these people, the Ofcom people, that come in to assess the kids. Now, the reason why there's this assessment, and it's something that Ken is really passionate about, and he said this is what the problem with the system is schools are essentially businesses. They are run as businesses, and the kids are the employees. So, it's one thing to sign yourself up to a company to earn a living. You're doing that voluntarily. No one forces you to do it. Yes, circumstances put you in situations where you have to kind of force yourself to apply for a job that you might not want, to sacrifice that and then later on down the line get a better job. But that's still a voluntary response. You choose to do that. As kids are walking in and thinking, for my first 3 or 4 years of my life, it's these days kids get sent to pre-nursery, which is, they get sent to nursery at the age of 3 instead of 4 or 5. And so they go in there and they initially start to have these troubles. It's something that I experienced as a child. And my first day of nursery, I still remember it was very traumatic. I cried a lot because I was like, well, you're throwing me in an environment with a bunch of strangers, with a bunch of kids that are also whining and crying. I'm like, this environment is just not what I'm used to being around. And you teach them from a very young age to fall in line and follow whatever else is doing. And to tell a child to just sit still, I still, as a person that went through ADD, it's difficult, to tell someone that, well, your problem is you can't sit still. And I remember all my reports to my parents used to be, well, your child is very bright, finishes his work before everyone else, and then decides to distract other kids. That's the problem. And I was just thinking to myself all these years later, if you worked for a company and you were able to finish all your work off, and then you also started, messing around with other people, they would also punish you for that as well, which is something that's really unusual, because the reason why I started messing around with other kids was because I had already done my task. It wasn't challenging enough for me. So I was just messing around with other kids to kind of get some sort of entertainment out of it. And it literally is that. Kids are seeking fun and enjoyment of learning and through entertainment as well, but you're doing it in such a rigid way, and you're telling them to sit down and write stuff they don't want to write. So that kid that you talked about that was amazing at Symmetry, so many kids are lost and filtered out. That creativity is filtered out, and that's what Ken Robertson's talking about. That initial creativity, that initial spark, that desire to see the world in a different way, it's taken out. And then it's funny because, and it's so ironic that so many years later, when these smart kids are put through that system and it's drained out of them, these top companies, Google, they start to seek employees that have that creativity, but you've just drained that out of them all these years, and then you're expecting them to suddenly find that again. So it's a horrible system, and it's something that really needs to change. And it's like what you said about the parents. It starts from the parents. The parents are the first teachers, but at the same time, if you think about it, they are supposed to be the first teachers, and yet most parents live such busy lives that they're like, I'll get someone else to raise my kid for me. And it comes on the teachers in nursery and then in reception that almost bring your kids up. So the kids learn from what their nursery teachers and their pre-adolescent teachers are bringing them up in. So that is the first barrier to exposure in the world. And
as a teacher, you've got to be very adaptive. Like, you have to, when you see a child, like you said yourself, like, what the teacher should have done was given you something else to do. Maybe that's a bit more active, like giving you an activity to do. Like, maybe, I don't know, go and tidy up this corner of the classroom. You're fidgeting. Maybe when you go, or giving you like a role in the classroom where you've got some sort of ownership over something, or you go and do something. Like, you can't tell a child to sit still. I mean, I had to deal with that, and I think at certain points when we used to have carpet time, I could see that the children are not listening, they're not focusing. We'd just get up and do like a 5-minute quick like brain gym, like little exercise little thing, and then they'd come down and they'd quiet down. And you've got to, no day is ever the same. And there were times where I'd be like, okay, you know what, I'm going to completely scrap this that I had planned, and I'm just going to go with what they want to do, because that way they're more engaged and I get more from them. And there are other styles of teaching like that. We've got the Montessori system, which is all child-centered, and it's all about, rather than planning for the child, you observe the child, you see what they're interested in, and then you plan for that, or you provide the activities And it's more, it's all about sort of, it's much more child-centered. So there are some things in place, but I think like I'm talking about like a global fundamental change needs to occur. And yeah, I think also parents they need to take time to understand the children. I found it very heartbreaking when I would see children being picked up by their parents and the parents are just walking off and the child's like running after them, telling them all these little exciting things, and the parents on their phone or they're distracted talking to someone else, and it was just really hard to watch and things like that. So that's why I feel like parents and teachers need to work much more hand in hand. And
yeah,
I
think
yeah.
Yeah, go on.
No, I was just gonna say, like, I remember an example of a parent coming to see me and just wanting to have a little chat after school, and then her child was just playing around, and the parent's like, okay, she went to pick up and put his coat on, and I said, no, he can actually put his coat on by himself. And then she watched him put his coat on. She goes, I didn't even know he could wear his own coat. And I was like, you don't even know, like, you don't. That's what I'm saying. How can you not know this about your own child? So yeah.
But this is quite controversial to say, but it also comes before the child is even born. Like most kids these days in the West are born by accident. It's like you didn't really want the child, and the child just was born because of you being clumsy and not being safe enough and this and that. And it's just like that from the start. If you have that instilled and you carry that going during the pregnancy, and we know through obviously Ayurveda that whatever mental state and whatever has been said whilst the woman's pregnant, those characteristics almost get adopted by the child, and you almost create those insecurities before the child's even born. So it's unconscious insecurities and unconscious problems that you're already programming the child to have before they're even born. But so it's the parent's responsibility that the moment that the child is born is to be completely, obviously, happy by the existence of this new person in the world. But we see many parents, and I've seen it when I used to, catch public transport, which I never do these days, and I never did back in university. It was only my first year of university. I remember going home with my mate, and I observed this lady who had a crying child, and she didn't know what to do, so she was just like allowing the crying child to cry. And this Iranian lady who was already with a child in the pram, she went over and she gave the child a biscuit or something, and the child immediately started smiling and stopped crying. And the mother just went crazy and said, "Don't tell me how to raise my own child." And I was just thinking to myself, and I said to her quietly, I said, it's not worth you doing it. And I get it, like your intention is right, to obviously stop this crying child from crying, but the parents don't see it. The parents literally just see it as, well, you're stepping in and you're intruding my space. Yeah, and it's almost an ownership on the child. It's like you don't own the child. You may have given birth to the child, but in no way you own the child.
That's another thing. Parents see their children as an extension of themselves. Or I brought you into this world, therefore I own you. Therefore you need to do what I... Yeah, you need to do what I say. But that's not... You may have birthed a child, but you've birthed an individual, but they're independent from the moment that they're born. That child has a sense of, okay, they're dependent on you for their physical needs and emotional needs, but they are a whole separate entity within themselves, and they may not have the same interests that you. They may be, they look different from you. Everything about them is different. They're fully their own person, and that's what parents need to realize, that often is very much projecting who they are onto the child. And I know that, like, I've grown up with my parents projecting, this is what you need to be like, this is what you need to do, but it just doesn't work like that. And parents kind of need to wake up to that. And some are, but there are still parents that they just don't understand, or they're not educated on how to really raise a child. They don't educate themselves. It's like, it's that very generational sort of thinking, oh, my parents did it and I can do it, we'll manage, or whatever, But I think before even having a child, there needs to be an intentional sense. It needs to be intentional, like, okay, now I'm ready this is how I want to raise my child. And yeah, and I feel like that is another thing that needs to change, I think. And I think that some people are waking up to that now. But yeah, I know that there are some situations where parents, they really can't. They are, on the flip side, there are parents that want to give their child the time and everything, and they just can't, just because of their financial situation and things like that. So, but then, there needs to be something that caters for all for all in some way. Like, again, then if there are parents that can't spend that time that they want to spend with children, then something in their working environment needs to change. You know, it's not just this is not just like this. It's a whole society. The society as a whole just needs to just change in that sense.
Yeah. Do you think it stems from, so the parents are obviously they adopt the characteristics of the society they live in, and I feel like when we have these laws that are in place that say, well, you know, women can do whatever with their bodies, and you know, when a woman is pregnant, it's obviously her baby, and these kind of ideologies that are pushed in the mainstream that are pushing men away from the active contribution towards raising the child, you get situations where kids are growing up without a father figure, and their father figure that they do have is usually quite lousy for most kids, you know, that obviously, like we said, didn't want the child in the first place and the child was born, or they don't participate in the child's life because of their circumstances, because the court sided with the mother. And I think it stems from that. It's not just the education system, but it's also the law system as well that are defending this idea of, you know, and again, it's a controversial topic, but abortions and telling mothers that, you know, it's your right to abort the child. And you don't understand, like, it takes two people to create an individual, but as soon as that individual is a certain number of weeks old or a certain number of months old, it's its own being. It's not part of you. It's not a parasite. I remember watching a talk, a debate about abortion, and the person that was hosting the debate asked this question to a person that was pro-abortion. He said, are you now suggesting that, you know, the child is a parasite? Is it seeking stuff off you that you're almost treating it as a parasite, or do you treat it as a separate individual? And the lady didn't know how to respond, so she almost by default said it's a parasite. And it's just like, how? So this is what I mean. Like, how are you gonna bring that child up if you decide to keep it, that, you know, you'd almost treat it as a parasite when it existed inside of your belly?
I mean, I remember on trips, like going on the bus and stuff, where I've seen horrific things. I've seen like parents like smacking their children, not just smacking, but literally swearing at their children, like because they're crying. Like, it's just awful. And I know this is a bit of a harsh thing to say, but like, if you don't want a child, then don't be safe. Don't have children. Like, think about what you're doing. People need to. It's not a joke. You know, this is a very serious thing. And like, if that's how you're going to treat the child, then you're better off giving that child away to somebody who actually wants children and can't have them, maybe, or something like that. Like, that's just awful. Like, that kind of thing that we see.
Yeah, but it's like we just said there. It's not just when the child is born and is going through the process. It's the parent's responsibility to say, you know, do I want to be a parent? And initially, you know, you think about it very lightly in the head and you think, yeah, it'd be amazing to be a parent, to have another you running around. But then it's that, even that mindset that it's another you running around, it isn't. It's a completely different being. It might look like you, but it's a completely different being. And I find it fascinating, like, kids and animals have so many similar things, and especially baby animals. Baby animals and baby human beings are exactly the same. They have the same curiosity. And my friend Baz has a baby kitten, and last night I went to see him, and the kitten and I were just literally just playing around, and throughout the entire session the cat rarely looked at Baz. The cat was just playing around with me, and I just look at the kitten and I think to myself, you know, this is how children are. And to have that curiosity in the world, and it learns from how you respond. So, you know, we have to be very cautious about how we you know, we behave and we carry ourselves.
And speak, the way we speak as well. Yes. Like, speak, I think, is very, very, because children are sponges. Like, they're sponges. They pick up on what you say, what you learn. I think I haven't been a teacher for very long, but like, certain kids, I knew exactly what was going on at home just from the way that child was talking. Like, they would swear and all sorts of things they'd say. I'd be like, oh my gosh, I know what they're being exposed to at home. And yeah, it's like the way that they're spoken to as children as well. That language, they bring it back into the classroom. And it's very conflicting for them because they're very young. They're just picking up on everything you're learning. And then you're at home, you know, you're learning that it's okay to swear. It's okay to tell other children to shut up. It's okay to just be aggressive. And then you come into like a school environment and you're told, you know, they're told off. The children are being told off for what they're doing. But you can't, it's not actually them, it's the parents. It's what are you teaching your child? Because a child doesn't know that it's swearing unless they become aware of like certain words, you know. Some children would use certain words like in when I was teaching, and they didn't know what they'd said, and I was like, do you know the word that you just said? Do you know what it means? They're like, no, but my mum says it, so it's okay. And it's like, you know, you kind of, and then that's why there needs to be that sense of harmony of like what they're learning at and where they're being raised at home, and then what they're bringing into the classroom. And yeah, there's such a disparity, I think.
Do you think it's also the culture that we exist in where parents are now taking shortcuts just to keep their kids quiet? So I've seen this in the airport where, you know, these two Asian babies were crying, so the parents just threw 2 iPads at them and they were completely quiet. So it's using the short-term solution and thinking, oh, you know, instant gratification there where the child is quiet now, and then
programming them.
You're programming them, yeah, because in the future there's going to be issues there that you can't take shortcuts to address anymore. So
yeah, we live in that world now. It's very hard. I think even as adults, it's like if everything is very much, it's instant gratification. It's like you want to buy something, you don't even need to go down to the shop to get it. You just click a button and you've got it. And even with kids now, it's like, I think on one side, you know, this technology is a bit of it's a touchy subject, but I think it's important to introduce children to technology because that is a huge part of the world now and they need to know about it, but it needs to be done in a very careful way. How much we expose them to it, what we expose them to. There's just, you know, there needs to be some sense of a balance. But yeah, I think a lot of it, it's like, oh, my kid's crying, let me shove an iPad in their face just to keep them quiet and stuff. And you know, there are times and places where it's okay. They may need to be distracted, or they may need something to keep them quiet in certain environments. You know, fine, there are times, but I think it becomes like a habit, or it becomes like even when they don't need it. It's the same thing with dummies. Like children are given dummies, and then, you know, I had one child in my nursery who had speech problems because he had a dummy shoved in his mouth all the time. It's even things like that. But you know, it's
psychological abuse, really, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, I'm a big believer in, like, as soon as children, you know, they turn like maybe 3 or 4, they can start becoming independent in things like putting on their own clothes, you know, helping out in, I also believe in like helping out at home with things, you know, teaching children age appropriate chores and things like that. You're setting them up to be well-rounded individuals and understand that actually the way that we keep our environment is very important. It's important to be clean, it's important to be safe. And you're empowering children when you give them things to do. I know, like, I loved it as a kid in primary school when I was given certain jobs to do in the classroom. And I would do that even with kids as young as 3 and 4. Certain kids, you know, when they know that they can handle it, or they need that sense of like, I want to be in charge of something, you know, it just empowers them. And that's what we should be doing. We should be empowering children, not, you know, getting them to conform to what we believe in. You know, discipline and, you know, I wouldn't say discipline, but I'd say boundaries. There need to be boundaries in place because we don't want to, you know, children need structure and they need boundaries. But, you know, I think stuff like naughty step and then sending children to the room, it doesn't work anymore. Those kind of things just really need to change.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great place to wrap up. I think we could probably do an entire episode on this. I think from what this can, you know, delve into so many different topics, and I really want to go into it. So, yeah, we'll definitely do a part 2. But then I also said to Darshan that I wanted both of you and Darshan on together, and we can go more into like the relationships and the how to have a spiritual relationship and how to have, obviously, balance it out with a material relationship as well. So that'd be quite nice to go into. And obviously I don't have any experience from that, so I can't really talk about that. But it'd be nice to have you two guys on. Any more last words, or is that pretty...
No, I'd say that's pretty much it. I think something that I'm personally working on myself now is just working more alongside parents in how to kind of educating parents on how we can raise children in alternative ways that will benefit not just the parents but also the children as well, and working together rather than working against or working in this sort of like hierarchical, however you say it, kind of way where the parent is the parent then the child kind of thing. So, but yeah, it was. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to just share my thoughts and share my experiences. It was really good. Actually, yeah, it's really insightful. Sometimes when you're speaking more about something, you start to learn more about yourself as well. So yeah, it was really great. And thanks for sharing some of the things that you shared about your experiences growing up as well. I always find it really fascinating to hear stories. And I would never have thought that about you, that you grew up sort of like being like that in an environment, in schools, being all like fidgety and everything. And I think that works. Like now you can probably understand why you're like that. It's because you're quite an active person, and you that's how you probably learn, and you're stimulated, and that's what your passion is. So yeah, it's really fascinating to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for being on the podcast anyway. I just want to finish off by asking you, so this whole thing that you're doing where you're working with parents, are you doing it on a platform? Are you doing it in person, or have you got like a business?
No, not yet. At the moment, it's kind of behind the scenes because it's just it's something that I've only started recently working on. But yeah, there will be a point, maybe when we have like a part 2 or something like that, where I can then kind of talk about something that I'm launching. So at the moment, there's nothing going out publicly just yet. Yeah. But yeah, that's in the works at the moment.
Yeah, it seems exciting. So yeah, what I'll do is anything that comes up, I'll definitely repost it and try and get it out there as much as possible. And we'll definitely have you again for part 2. And yeah, thank you so much for coming, attending the podcast, Ambika, and yeah, we'll definitely see you soon. I'll put all your social media links in the description, and yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for having me, and I really love what you're doing, and I look forward to hearing more and just getting more people on. It's really exciting.
Yeah, hopefully this is recorded properly on my side, because I'm looking at the spikes and it doesn't look good, but okay, perfect. Right, so this is podcast 31. It's going to be in the usual spots: Spotify, YouTube, Instagram. There'll be a preview, and iTunes as well. Thank you so much for watching, guys. We shall see you in the next one.